God's grace is extravagant. We love because God first loved us. We keep the cycle of love energized by receiving God's grace and generosity and passing it on. God's grace repairs, redeems, rescues, and restores. Sharon and I were recipients of God's grace and the cycle of love and generosity shown by others when we needed it most. Our son Ryan suffered a tragic death over 20 years ago. We obviously were devastated. But 2 days later, we received a letter from the Escatawba, Mississippi congregation. It was a letter that we received based on a Wednesday night prayer service they had had when they had prayed for our family. Included in the letter was the signatures of everyone who was in attendance. We had never heard of Escatawba, Mississippi, but all of a sudden it became a very, very special place to us. About a month later, I got enough courage up to take my first field assignment. I flew out from Kansas City to Atlanta, and on the airplane I read the Herald. In the Herald there was an article about baptisms in, you guessed it, Escatawba, Mississippi. I thought, God, that's an awfully good touch. Thank you. I got off the airplane, met a gentleman named Tony Tristani Jr. We got in the car and we were heading to his house, and I knew that his accent didn't seem like it was from Atlanta. And so I said to him, where are you from? He said, and you can guess, Escatawba, Mississippi. He said, a matter of fact, my daughter was baptized in Escatawba last summer. I said, God, this is unbelievable. Thank you. A few years later, Sharon and I were at a reunion in the Carolinas. It was over Labor Day, and it was the weekend of a major hurricane that had done damage to Escatawba, Mississippi. The gentleman in charge of the service said, it was a long time ago that Sharon, my wife's father, John Gorker, who was a missionary for the church, did cottage meetings for Tony Tristani Sr. All of a sudden, I thought, oh my goodness gracious, this whole miracle of love would have never happened without the love of God and the cycle completed by God's loving children. First, Thelma, Tony Tristani Sr.'s wife, invited her husband to become a part of the community of Christ. My father-in-law, John Gorker, offered cottage meetings to Tony Tristani Sr. My father-in-law was a full-time missionary for the church, and without the generous offerings of the saints, he would not have been able to serve in that capacity. Tony and his wife Thelma, along with the saints in Escatawba, showed their compassion by passing on the love and the grace of God. You see, if it hadn't been for Tony and Thelma, Tony Tristani Jr. would not have been in Atlanta. Their granddaughter, Lauren, would not have been baptized, and the experience would have been unraveled without the thread of the cycle of love. The Herald that I received and read on the airplane was purchased by saints and was a message of grace from the community of Christ to all those who receive the Herald. And Sharon and I had to learn something fairly new, which was to be willing to receive gratefully the gifts that others had to share. We become most fully disciples when we respond and complete the cycle of the generosity of God's grace that repairs, redeems, rescues, and restores. Praise God.